Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, July 29th, 2022. House Democrats bring to the floor a bill that bans assault weapons but put off debate on bills on policing amid disagreements among the House Democrats over how to hold police departments accountable. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi starting a multi-country tour of Asia with a reported possible stop in Taiwan, asked about the significance of her trip. The House Republican leader, Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, says he does not recall having a conversation with a key witness at the House committee investigating the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol about whether then President Donald Trump should be coming to Capitol Hill with protesters that became rioters. Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito poking a little fun at foreign criticism of the opinion he wrote in a case that overturned the Roe v. Wade right to abortion. A bill to tackle wildfires and droughts comes up in the U.S. House. We'll hear some of that debate and talk about it with a reporter at E&E News. And the House chaplain gives a post-congressional baseball game prayer. Politico.com has a story. House Democrats will vote Friday on a historic bill to ban so-called assault weapons in response to a spate of mass shootings this year, a sudden strategy shift after party leaders failed to land the votes for a broader slate of public safety bills, also slated for floor action. The assault weapons vote, a huge party priority, will mark the first time in nearly 3 decades that lawmakers attempt to reinstate the long-expired ban on semi-automatic firearms. Still, the decision to vote on only that bill and not a handful of policing bills, also under consideration, stings from many centrist Democrats in the caucus who were eager to vote on bills to support law enforcement before leaving Washington this week. That reporting from Politico. Here's some of the floor debate supporting the assault weapons ban. Congresswoman Deborah Ross, Democrat from North Carolina.
I represent a southern state. Many of my constituents are responsible, law-abiding gun owners, and I support their ability to exercise their Second Amendment rights. Contrary to what opponents of this legislation continue to claim, this bill will allow current law-abiding gun owners to keep all of their guns. It simply prevents future sales of assault rifles. And let's be clear, assault weapons are designed to kill as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. They're not designed for recreation. They're designed for combat. It's incredibly irresponsible to allow people without specialized training to possess these weapons. And, Madam Speaker, when assault weapons are used in mass shootings, an average of 6 times as many people are shot as in other mass shootings. In 2022, there have already been 24 school shootings. The deadliest in Uvalde, Texas, involved assault weapons. But if my friends across the aisle are not convinced of the need to protect our children, perhaps they will be convinced of the need to protect the police. According to Violence Policy Center, 1/4 of law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty in 2016 were killed by an assault weapon. After the assault weapons ban expired, the proportion of large-capacity magazines-equipped guns used in murder of police increased by 30%. These weapons belong with our military, not on our streets or in our schools.
Congresswoman Deborah Ross, Democrat from North Carolina, on the House floor. Rising in opposition to this bill, Congresswoman Michelle Fischbach, Republican from Minnesota.
My colleagues are proving yet again that they want to strip law-abiding citizens of their Second Amendment rights. The latest so-called assault weapons ban is unconstitutional and will impact other aspects of American life. This bill would end the sale of some of the most popular rifles sold in America today, impacting the sporting industry and all of those who rely on it for their livelihood. This bill will have an impact in ways even the supporters of the bill don't understand. For example, under this law, stabilizing braces for pistols would be outlawed. Despite what some of my colleagues have said, stabilizing braces are not bump stocks and will not turn a pistol into an assault rifle. Stabilizing braces are used by hunters with disabilities, including many of our disabled veterans, to help them safely hunt with pistols. Not only is this bill an assault on our constitutional rights, but the loss of the revenue from the sales of these firearms will also have a devastating effect on the federal aid to Wildlife Restoration Fund, which helps states pay for environmental conservation efforts. The bill provides no alternative for how to make up for this severe decrease in conservation funding. Democrats are no longer disguising their radical agenda to ban guns and do away with the Constitution's Second Amendment. My colleagues from the other side have said that they will do everything they can to ban guns in this country, even to the point of packing the Supreme Court to make it happen. Everyone who thinks this bill is not a step in that direction is kidding themselves.
Congresswoman Michelle Fischbach, Republican from Minnesota, on the House floor. Even with the votes in the House to pass this assault weapons ban, as it heads to the Senate, previous statements and votes by Senate Republicans as a guide showing there are not 60 votes needed to overcome a likely filibuster in that chamber. More now on those policing bills that were expected to come up alongside the assault weapons ban. Again, this according to the Politico article. Moderate leader Congressman Josh Gottheimer, Democrat from New Jersey, and Congressional Black Caucus Chief Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, Democrat from Ohio, had secured an 11th hour deal to resolve many black Democrats' concerns with the policing bills. But that compromise, which included some new accountability measures for police departments, fell flat with many House progressives, including those in the Black Caucus. Several liberal black Democrats were particularly livid at the language, according to one person familiar with the discussions, and some complained that the accountability language did too little during a closed-door meeting of Black Caucus members Friday morning. That reporting from Politico. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi telling reporters today that she expects policing bills to be on the House floor for debate in a couple of weeks.
I'm so proud to announce that as of late last night, we've come to terms in terms of how we support our law enforcement and do so with accountability. I have to pay tribute to Joyce Beatty, the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, to Josh Gottheimer, who really has been a leader on this issue, and Abigail Spanberger. She had a bill too, and they found a way to do what we want to support our men and women in uniform, but to also do so with accountability. Since we talked about a security package, though, we've been flooded with so many bills that people have, so we need to, shall we say, we have to have the bandwidth to deal with all of them, and hopefully, not hopefully, we plan to bring those support for our men and women in law enforcement with accountability to the floor in the second week of August when we come back. That is what I think will conform to when the Senate may be ready to send us the very important legislation whose title is Inflation Reduction Act.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat from California, her opening statement at her weekly news conference. The House is beginning its August recess today, but as she referenced, members expect to be back in a couple of weeks to vote on the $700 billion, which she called the Deficit Reduction Act, originally called the Build Back Better Act, the new version having climate and energy provisions, healthcare provisions, and tax provisions. This is Washington Today. More from Speaker Pelosi. The New York Post writes this. A Chinese government propagandist said Friday that Beijing could shoot down House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's plane if it's accompanied by U.S. military aircraft during an anticipated August visit to Taiwan, a dramatic escalation in rhetoric as relations between the two powers get worse and worse. Pelosi due to depart Friday on a multi-nation tour of Asia and has refused to confirm reports that she will visit the self-governing island in a demonstration of support of Taiwan's de facto independence. That from the New York Post. Back to Speaker Pelosi's news conference. She was asked about it.
I know you don't want to talk about your travel, but can you at least talk about the significance of visiting Asia? What type of message you and a congressional delegation would want to send if you, in fact, make this trip?
Well, I don't ever talk about my travel because, as some of you know, it's a security issue. It's a security issue for every member of Congress traveling, especially abroad. But for the Speaker, it is an additional security issue, and for those traveling with me, not just members, but staff, etc. The president earlier in his term, talked about a strong emphasis on the Asian Pacific. He has visited there, as Vice President's visited there, the Secretary of Commerce and others, and we want the Congress of the United States to be part of that initiative. Of course, as a West Coast person, we see the Pacific as that's our home. We're part of that as well. That is not to diminish the importance of our transatlantic relationships as well. But I'm very excited should we go to the countries that you'll be hearing about along the way about how the conversations we have now. Earlier this year, a couple months ago, I guess it was, we had 9 leaders of the ASEAN, the Southeast Asian countries, and at the House. Was bipartisan. In fact, we invited some of the Senate to come, and some participated to have a conversation, hear their presentations, and relate. Another symbol, the president had that ASEAN meeting in Washington, D.C., and we were very much a part of it. So again, we have global responsibilities, whether it comes to 3 things, I always say: security, economy, and governance. And this will be part of that.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi at her news conference today on Capitol Hill. A Fox News story on her trip notes that the United States does not have any official relations with Taiwan, but has been stepping up engagement with the island as China seeks to isolate it from global institutions. Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke by phone to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Friday, reports Associated Press, in the highest level known contact between the two sides since Russia invaded Ukraine, with Blinken urging Russia to accept the deal to win the release of American detainees Brittany Griner and Paul Whelan. Russian officials gave no public hint whether Blinken had made any headway, but issuing a chiding statement afterward, urging the U.S. to pursue the Americans' freedom through quiet diplomacy without releases of speculative information. That from AP. Secretary Blinken giving an update today with reporters.
We said all along that if we thought there was any opportunity to advance diplomacy to end Russia's aggression against Ukraine, we would, of course, take it. Unfortunately, tragically, we've seen no opening, willingness on the part of Russia to engage meaningfully on ending the aggression. At the same time, I've also said that if there are issues where it could make a difference in senior Russians hearing directly from me or from colleagues, we would, of course, pursue that. And with regard to the call with the foreign minister today, as I noted the other day when we had an opportunity to speak, I told you what I intended to raise with him, and I raised exactly what I said I would raise with him. That is the significant proposal that's been on the table for some weeks now that would lead to bringing home Paul Whelan and Brittany Griner. I urged Foreign Minister Lavrov to move forward with that proposal. I'm not going to characterize his response, and I can't give you an assessment of whether I think things are any more or less likely, but it was important that he hear directly from me on that.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken at the State Department today answering a reporter's question. CNN has this: Russian government officials requested that a former colonel from the country's domestic spy agency who was convicted of murder in Germany last year be added to the U.S. proposed swap of a notorious arms dealer for Brittany Griner and Paul Whelan. Multiple sources familiar with the discussion tells CNN. CNN identifying that person as Vadim Krazakov, to be released in addition to Victor Bout. This is Washington today. The U.S. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy says he does not remember talking to former White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson on January 6, 2021, about the possibility that former President Donald Trump would travel to the U.S. Capitol as Congress was certifying the 2020 Electoral College results. the day in which a mob of Trump supporters ended up attacking the Capitol. Hutchinson testified under oath in June that McCarthy called her that day angry and said, "The president just said he's marching to the Capitol. You told me this whole week you aren't coming up here. Why would you lie to me?" Here's the question and answer to McCarthy on Capitol Hill.
Cassidy Hutchinson testified that
So we're going to January 6th.
Yes,
Go ahead.
she
Yes.
testified under oath.
You know we're in
that-
a recession too, right?
Well, she testified under oath saying that you called her after Donald Trump said that, told her supporters that they were going to go to the Capitol, and you were concerned about those remarks and said, "Don't come up here. Figure it out. Don't come up here." She said that under oath. Did you tell her that, and why were you concerned about the prospect of Donald Trump coming to the Capitol on January 6th?
To be honest with you, I don't recall talking to her that day. I recall talking to Dan Scavino. I recall talking to Jared. I recall talking to Trump. That's what I talked to on television like that too. If I talked to her, I don't remember it. If it was coming up here, I don't think I wanted a lot of people coming up to the Capitol, but I don't remember the
Why were you
conversation.
concerned specifically about Trump coming to the Capitol?
I don't remember that.
You don't remember
And-
being concerned about his
No.
comments?
No, but because I didn't watch it. See, this is what is so confusing. I didn't watch the speech. I was working. So I didn't see what was said. I didn't see what went on till after the fact.
Did
So,
you want him to come to the Capitol?
no, I've never communicated with him about coming to the Capitol. I had no idea he would come to the Capitol. I had no idea that he was even going to come to the Capitol. That's news to
She
me.
said under oath that you told her throughout the course of the week, or reassured you through the course of the week that he was not going to come to the Capitol. So apparently you had a
I
number of
don't
conversations.
remember having any conversations with her about coming to the president coming to the Capitol. I don't recall any of that. I recall my conversation with Dan Scavino. I recall calling Jared. That was in the midst of the Capitol, people breaking into the Capitol, me being removed from the office. That's when I called people.
And what were your conversations with Scavino like? What were you trying
Well,
to
I was trying to find the president.
House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy of California at his news conference today on Capitol Hill. The chair of the House Select Committee investigating January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, Benny Thompson, Democrat of Mississippi, telling reporters today that the committee could look at phone records to see if Kevin McCarthy made any call to Cassidy Hutchinson on that day, January 6, 2021. A story at NBC News, Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito mocked prominent figures around the world, including Prince Harry and outgoing British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, for speaking out against the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. NBC writes that it appears to be the first public comments from Justice Alito since that abortion decision was handed down. Alito was at a religious liberty conference in Rome last week, hosted by Notre Dame Law School. Video posted on Thursday.
I had the honor this term of writing, I think, the only Supreme Court decision in the history of that institution that has been lambasted by a whole string of foreign leaders who felt perfectly fine commenting on American law. One of these was former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, but he paid the price. Post hoc ergo propter hoc, right? But others are still in office. President Macron and Prime Minister Trudeau, I believe, are too. But what really wounded me was when the Duke of Sussex addressed the United Nations and seemed to compare the decision whose name may not be spoken with the Russian attack on Ukraine. Well, despite this temptation, I'm not going to talk about cases from other countries. All I am going to say is that ultimately, if we are going to win the battle to protect religious freedom in an increasingly secular society, we will need more than positive law.
Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito at a religious liberty conference in Rome, Italy last week. The host at Notre Dame Law School putting it online on Thursday. Since the Supreme Court decision that overturned Roe v. Wade, Democrats in the U.S. Congress, who currently hold the majority in the House and Senate and therefore the committee chairs, have been holding hearings looking at the fallout for various parts of society. Today, the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Personnel had a hearing about women in the armed services stationed at bases around the country that they did not choose. Here's the subcommittee chair, Jackie Spear, Democrat from California.
Many bases are in states where abortion is or likely will be restricted. In fact, look at Texas, where we have 19 installations, and Florida, where we have 17 installations. And in both those states, right now, you can't get an abortion under virtually any circumstance. 1/4 of the women will have an abortion before the end of their childbearing years. Of the service women currently serving in the military, we'd expect that more than 50,000 of them would have an abortion during their lifetime. And for many of them, it will be during their years of military service. Even before the Dobbs decision, abortion access has long been a struggle in the military, especially for those overseas and junior enlisted with lower incomes. Under current law, DOD is prohibited from providing abortions except in cases of rape, incest, or threat to the life of the mother. These exceptions are so narrow that DOD has confirmed to me that only between 11 and 21 service members have undergone an abortion at a military facility each year over the past 5 years. Think about that. That means the vast majority of service members are forced to pay out of pocket not only for the care they need, but also for other expenses, including lodging, gas, or airfare, and childcare. The Dobbs decision will no doubt exacerbate these challenges, forcing service members to travel longer distances and shoulder greater financial burdens. That is, if they are granted leave in the first place. Let me be clear. It is inhumane to force women to remain pregnant against their will. It is arrogant to think that we know better than a woman or her doctor about what's best for her body. It is wrong to create government-mandated pregnancies. And I feel so strongly that this is going to discourage women to enlist, to serve, and to remain in the military. It will become, if it hasn't already, become both a recruitment and a retention issue.
Congresswoman Jackie Spear, Democrat from California, chair of the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Personnel, at today's hearing on access to abortion and military service women. Military Times writing an article on the hearing adding this: there are hundreds of military installations, both in the U.S. and abroad. Not all of them have providers who do abortions, nor is there a requirement that someone be assigned to do so. And they add, as Jackie Spear mentioned, military treatment facilities do fewer than 24 covered procedures a year per DoD data, sending patients off base if they don't have an in-house provider. That's no longer an option in states like Alabama, South Dakota, Ohio, and Missouri, where the law provides no exceptions for rape or incest. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Listen to C-SPAN Radio with our free mobile app, C-SPAN Now. Get complete access to what's happening in Washington, wherever you are, with live streams of floor proceedings and hearings from the U.S. Congress, White House events, the courts, campaigns, and more. Plus analysis of the world of politics with our informative podcasts. C-SPAN Now is available at the Apple Store and Google Play. Download it for free today. C-SPAN Now, your front row seat to Washington, anytime, anywhere.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. It is the middle of wildfire season. More than 70 large wildfires currently blazing across the United States. U.S. House today passing a package of bills designed to address wildfires, forest management, and drought, or as E&E News puts it, how best to tackle the climate crisis on public lands. We'll talk with an E&E News reporter in a couple of minutes. First, here's some of the House floor debate. Congressman Joe Neguse, Democrat from Colorado, chairs the subcommittee on national parks, forests, and public lands.
H.R. 5118 provides a whole-of-government response to the droughts and the wildfires impacting American communities across the country, and it combines more than 50 standalone pieces of legislation originating from 9 different House committees, including Republican and Democratic bills. We began this important work last year, as my colleagues know, working with President Biden to pass the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which included historic investments to reduce wildfire risk, improve ecosystem resilience, and ensure reliable water supplies. The Wildfire Response and Drought Resiliency Act builds on those investments. It provides an increased starting wage for our brave and courageous federal wildland firefighters. It invests in water security and in drought resilience and advancing wildfire science. As climate change-induced drought means long-term reductions in rain and snow and necessary water supplies, this legislation invests in drought-proof water projects like water recycling, modern desalination, advancing water data management and technology, protecting and restoring ecosystems. The bill also advances projects to deliver reliable water across Indian country, including incorporating our bill, the Tribal Access to Clean Water Act. And it provides significant resources to prevent key Colorado River reservoirs from declining to critically low water levels, protecting the supplies of a river that 40 million Americans, 40 million, rely on. H.R. 5118 also includes several other important pieces of legislation introduced by many members in the body today. Provisions from Tim's Act, named after a heroic smoke jumper, Tim Hart, who tragically lost his life fighting a wildfire in New Mexico, would increase pay and benefits for federal wildland firefighters, and that provision is part of this bill. Finally, the bill includes provisions that would provide flexibility in federal FEMA cost shares to support our local communities and to protect watersheds impacted by wildfire.
Congressman Joe Neguse, Democrat from Colorado, on the House floor. Opposing this bill, Congressman Bruce Westerman, Republican from Arkansas. He's the ranking member on the Natural Resources Committee.
There are 2 ways to reduce wildfire risk: thinning and controlled burning. This bill mentions thinning 0 times. Not once does it mention thinning, but it mentions environmental justice 165 times. That should tell you what this bill is really about. Instead of streamlining environmental regulations and addressing frivolous litigation, which delay vital forest management projects across the country, this bill would add mountains of new red tape on our federal agencies that will grind their already glacial pace of treatments to a complete halt. It would throw out the Forest Service's 10-year strategy to reduce hazardous fuels and make them completely redo this work less than 6 months after they started implementing their current strategy. This makes you wonder if congressional Democrats disagree with the work of the Biden administration, or if they found the administration's work product is deficient and unreliable. It would lock up 58 million acres of land into new roadless areas, despite research showing that more than half of all fires, including most of the largest fires on western U.S. national forest lands, burn primarily in roadless areas, areas where land restrictions use mean that we can't thin and we can't do management. Instead, the bill would fund environmental volunteerism to provide N95 masks and smoke inhalation equipment for homes, which I'm sure will be of little comfort to people as their homes are burning to the ground. Democrats will tell you this legislation raises wildland firefighter pay to $20 per hour. The only problem with that is that firefighters already make at least $20 per hour, meaning this so-called raise is an empty promise. In the long term, the bill would write a check that it can't cash by setting up this new minimum pay rate with no actual money to back it up. The Forest Service has told us this means they would have to lay off over 610 wildland firefighters.
Congressman Bruce Westerman, Republican from Arkansas and ranking member on the Natural Resources Committee on the House floor. A headline at E&E News, huge wildfire drought package readied for House votes. Jennifer Yachnin is a reporter with E&E News, joining us now on the phone. Thanks for being with us. Huge. Give us an overview of this omnibus package.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. So the House today was debating this, as you said, huge bill. It's a combination of 48 other pieces of legislation that do all sorts of things for wildfire and also for drought. And of course, one of the big headline issues here is that the bill contains a provision to raise federal firefighting salaries to at least $20 an hour. That's an effort to sort of bring those up on parity with state level firefighter pay. But of course, it's sort of been a big point of contention between Republicans and Democrats in the House.
Congressman Westerman said that the bill deals with wildfire response, not prevention. What are some of the differences between the parties on how they're approaching this?
Right. So without getting too technical or too far into the weeds, one of the complaints for Republicans here is that the bill doesn't actually have language on thinning. Literally what it sounds like, thinning out those forests and trying to remove some of those fuels. But what it does make a priority are something called prescribed burns. So intentionally setting fire to a certain area. And essentially, prescribed burns and thinning sort of go hand in hand. So in some ways, it just sort of comes down to a dispute over language and what things are called. But in that same vein, Republicans have been very opposed to this large package of bills, arguing that not enough of them have actually gone through the Natural Resources Committee, have actually been marked up. They feel like this is all sort of being rammed through, while Democrats have come back and said, no, we need to do this now. This is a matter of urgency.
We see wildfires when they pop up in the news. They make national news. But are wildfires and droughts in the U.S. getting better or worse?
Right. Well, it definitely seems. Of course, we're in a 22-year drought here in the West. I'm based out of Denver, Colorado, and of course, 22 years of drought means drier forests, means less water in the reservoirs, and all of those things combine so that when you have wildfires, they're harder to deal with. So really one of the reasons they're trying to do this now, like you said, when there is a wildfire, it often makes national headlines. Well, there's no more wildfire season, really. It just sort of seems to be year-round, thanks to changes brought on by climate change, by more severe weather. And in that same vein, we're sort of in the peak season for drought. This is when reservoirs really drop to their lowest points. The spring runoff is gone. It's monsoon season in some places, but really we're still in this very dry era with states are sort of struggling to figure out what to do when they don't have those water resources that they got so used to, in the lead up to the current cycle we're in.
We're talking with Jennifer Yachnin with E&E News. When the bill passes the House, it heads over to the Senate. What's expected over there?
Right. Well, the House leaders addressed this question yesterday, and it's really a big question. They're sort of hopeful that the Senate will take it up and look at it with the same urgency. But right now, it's just not clear that the Senate will act on this because, of course, they're the much slower side of Congress. They're not quite as quick to take up legislation. So it's really wait and see.
Jennifer Yachnin, reporter with E&E News. Find her story at eenews.net and on Twitter at Jennifer Yachnin. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Climate and energy, a big part of the budget reconciliation bill that Senate Democrats plan to pass next week under rules that prevent a Republican filibuster. $369 billion over 10 years in tax credits and spending for renewable energy in the proposal. Also, there's a fee on methane emissions. President Biden has endorsed it, the package also having a lot of health care provisions and increases taxes on corporations. Today, reporters asking White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre about those who are progressive who wanted more when it came to climate.
Everyone's just had a beat to be able to kind of dig into the bill text, and we're starting to see some environmentalists really voicing concern, acknowledging obviously these huge investments in clean energy, but frustrated by some of the trade-offs, mandates for new drilling, mandates for opening up some different parts of the country to drilling. I was struck by Chairman Grijalva saying that he was particularly concerned that the deal's promise of comprehensive permitting reform was another euphemism for gutting our most foundational environmental and public health protections. So just what's your message to environmentalist leaders in your own party who are clearly worried that the climate investments just might not be enough to offset all this new drilling potential?
So I'm going to say that, I said this yesterday, which is, this is a historic piece of legislation. It is going to be a game changer for so many Americans, so many middle-class families, and that the president is grateful. We have said it, is grateful for the work that has been done by Senator Manchin and Senator Schumer and others in making this happen. And so the way that we see it is going to help struggling Americans in a big way. When you think about lowering costs, we've been talking about what are we going to do with inflation. This is one of those things, right? This is going to help Medicare actually be able to negotiate to lower this cost. This is going to lower energy costs. This is the biggest investment that we have ever seen in U.S. history when it comes to fighting climate change. So this is a big deal. This is incredibly important. But we also see this as a down payment on what the president talked about in 2019. When it comes to climate change, the president has taken bold actions for this past 18 months, and he will continue to do that. It doesn't end here. He'll continue to take action to make sure that we reach his goals, his emission goals. We believe that we will meet these goals with this particular piece of legislation, but there will be more work that we will continue to do.
Is it fair to say he just likes the whole bill, all of it?
He is grateful, and he thinks this is a historic bill, and this will help struggling families, and this is part of fighting inflation. And also, when you think about the deficit, lowering the deficit, which we've already seen this past year, that was done by $1.7 trillion. Now we're going to add another $300 billion. This is a big deal. This is incredibly important for American families.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre in the White House briefing room with reporters. Senate not in session today. They are back on Monday, and the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer wants to pass this bill by the end of the week. Every Senate Democrat will be needed to vote yes to pass the climate, energy, healthcare tax bill. That's if every Senate Republican opposes it. One Senate Democrat has not yet said if she will support it. That's Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona. Wall Street today, the Dow up 315, NASDAQ up 228, S&P up 57. This from AP, an inflation gauge that is closely tracked by the Federal Reserve jumped 6.8% in June from a year ago, the biggest increase in 4 decades, leaving Americans with no relief from surging costs. The annual Congressional baseball game was Thursday night at Nationals Park in Washington, D.C. Republicans beat the Democrats 10-0. C-SPAN carried the game live, both C-SPAN radio and C-SPAN television. The play-by-play and commentary came from WTOP radio reporters George Wallace, who covers sports, and Mitchell Miller, who covers Congress. Here's their wrap-up of the game.
We'll shake hands. Another great night of baseball. Really was, and the pitching tonight was one of the best pitching performances we've seen of either team. As the Republicans shaking hands, both sides shaking hands, 10-0, the Republicans win it here tonight at Nationals Park. That's 2 in a row for them, win number 44 in the series, and now to 42 wins for the Democrats. Another great night, Mitch. It was fun. Let's do it again next year, maybe. A great night, and even with the rain, it didn't matter. We still had an awesome evening. That'll do it for us here at Nationals Park.
WTOP radio reporters George Wallace and Mitchell Miller at Nationals Park Thursday night. They mentioned the rain. There was a rain delay as the storms came through. At the start of today's U.S. House session, the House chaplain, Margaret Kroon-Gibbon, giving a prayer about the game.
Lord, it is good and fitting to eat, drink, and find enjoyment alongside the work with which we labor, and recreation in the days you have given us. So it is on this day that we come to you in gratitude for the pleasure received, not only in the privilege to serve you here in this place, but for the enjoyment of a good ball game, the civil rivalry of peers, and the abundant fellowship and support of friends and fans. Now, having fought the good fight, may we finish the week prolonging the collegial spirit found on the field, and upholding the shared commitment that brings us together for the common good. Grant comfort to the defeated, humility to the victors, respite to the weary, and wisdom to us all. Renewed by your Spirit, we offer these prayers in your everlasting name. Amen.
House Chaplain Margaret Kroon giving opening prayer at today's session. The Congressional Baseball Game for Charity is an annual bipartisan tradition that dates back to 1909. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get more of Washington's top stories sent to you every day. You can sign up at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.